Recently in our Excel Academy, Christopher Fennell shared some awesome techniques for working with checkboxes in Excel. And you know what? It got me inspired about what's now possible. Therefore, today I want to share with you some of those awesome techniques so that you can be inspired by checkboxes too. So if you're ready, let's get started. Here is the example file, and this is what we will be using for the rest of this video. If you want to work along, make sure you follow the links in the video description box below. Currently, this workbook just contains hard-coded values. We have the area where we want to track our month-end progress, and in there we have a list of tasks. We also have a table called Actions, which contains the task and then the sub-actions that are required for each task. That's the example file, which means we're now ready to start looking at checkboxes. If you haven't used the new checkboxes feature in Excel yet, it is easy to apply. All we have to do is select the cells in which we want to insert the checkbox. Then from the Insert ribbon, we can select Checkbox. And that now inserts a checkbox for each of those cells. These checkbox cells have an underlying value. For example, if I select on the first checkbox, it has a value of false. When I check that box, the value changes to true. So we can easily toggle these values between true and false. Not only that, we can also use the spacebar. If we select multiple cells, when I press space, it then toggles those values on or off. Now, provided the active cell, which is the first cell that we select, contains a checkbox, if we enter space, it doesn't overwrite the other values in that range. It only toggles between those checkbox options. Now, we're not restricted to just having black checkboxes. We can also format these. I'll select those cells, go up to Home, and then in text formatting, I'm going to select a mid-grey, and as you can see, the colour of those checkboxes has changed. We can also align left and right and apply other formatting. If we want to delete the checkboxes, we can press the delete key once to change all the values to false, and then press delete again to remove that checkbox. However, the thing to be aware of is that the formatting we applied was applied to the cell. So if we input any other text into that cell, it will take on the format which was already applied. Let me clear out that value. I'll select my cells again, then click Insert and Checkbox. We can also use checkboxes as a way to display the result of a formula. Let's add a checkbox into cell B8. Currently, this just contains a true or a false. However, if I change this to a formula, such as equals true, that means that our checkbox has the value of true, but checking it does nothing, because the true or false result is derived by a formula and not a cell value. That's the basics of checkboxes. Now let's take this a step further, which is dynamically highlighting the checked items. We can use conditional formatting to highlight the items that have been selected by our checkboxes. I'm going to select our checkboxes and our list, and then I'll go to the Home ribbon and Conditional Formatting and New Rule. And this is going to be based on a formula. The thing about formulas for conditional formatting is that they only apply if a cell value is true. Therefore, to apply this formatting, all we need to do is enter equals, select the first cell in our range, and press F4 so that we lock in our column reference but not our row reference. That means that depending on the formatting in the first column, it will apply that format to the other cells in that row. I'll then go to Format. We want our font to be bold, and let's select a green color. I'll click OK. OK. Now let's check one of our checkboxes. As you can see, that now highlights and our conditional formatting is applied to the checkbox and also the task. That's conditional formatting with checkboxes. Now let's move on and look at how we can calculate on checkboxes. Because checkboxes are just true and false values, there are various methods that we can use to calculate how many items have been checked. In this video, we're only going to look at one of those methods. I'll select cell C6, I'll start with equals, and then I'm going to select the range of cells. As you can see in the tooltip, those values are either true or false. If we add minus minus at the start of that, it then converts those numbers into zeros and ones. That means we can simply use the sum function with our range, and when that calculates, we can see that we have 2 items checked. If I select more items, that value now increases. But rather than a whole number, let's change this into a percentage. We will edit our formula, and we want to divide the sum by the count A. Count A counts any cells which are not empty. And the cells we want to use are all the cells containing our checkboxes. I'll close the bracket at the end and calculate. We can now see that that is 0.4. That is 40%, and I will format my cell so that it has a percentage format. Let's also add conditional formatting to this cell so that we get a progress bar. I'll go to conditional formatting, and we want to go to data bars and then more rules. In here, we want to set our minimum to a number, and that number should be 0. The maximum should also be a number, and that will be 1. We're going to have a solid fill, and let's select our same green color. I'll then click OK, and we now get our progress bar. As we check more items, the progress bar increases until we get up to 100%. I will select that and make the number bold to make it easier to read. Fantastic, we now have our checkboxes and we can easily see our progress for each of our tasks. So that's how we can calculate on the true and false values created by the checkboxes. Now let's take a look and see how we can create a basic drill down functionality for the selected item. In the example file, there is a table called Actions. In there, we have a column called Task and a column called Actions. What we want to do is to select one of our tasks using a checkbox and then display the actions which apply to that task. We're going to start by adding some more checkboxes. I'll go to Insert, Checkbox, and let's use the same color of light gray. Above that, let's insert an icon. I'll select the cell, go to Insert and Icons. We want to search for a search icon. Here we have a magnifying glass. I'll select that and click Insert. And then we have this icon to insert that value into a cell. And we're going to center align that value. Let's check one of our boxes. The result that we want is for the item selected, which is currently Review Accounts Payable, we want to list all of the actions from our table. We're going to build our formula in cell F9. I'll type equals let opening bracket, and then I'll press Alt and Enter to create a new line. Let is a function which allows us to assign a calculation result to a name, and then we can use that name later in our calculation. The first name we're going to create is position. This tells us the row number of where the first check exists. The function we want to use is xmatch, opening bracket. Our lookup value will be true because that is the value returned by a checked box. Our lookup array is going to be our range of checkboxes. I'll then close that bracket at the end. I'll enter a comma, And then the last argument of let is the value that we want to return. For now, let's just return our position. As you can see, we have position 3, and that's because the third checkbox is checked. If we apply it to position 4, we now get the value of 4. We're going to edit our formula, and we're going to add a new row. And the name we want to create is task. In here, we're going to use the index function. For the array, we want to select the values, which are our list of tasks, and the item that we want to return is based on the position. Now, you might be thinking, why didn't he use XLOOKUP instead of index and XMatch? And the reason is because we're going to reuse our position calculation later on in this formula. We're going to return our task. When that calculates, you can see that we have payroll reconciliation selected. Let's edit our formula once more, and now let's get our list of subtasks. I'll press Alt and Enter to create a new line. Subtasks are going to be based on the filter. We want to return the actions, and we want to return those where the task is equal to our task calculation. I'll close the filter, and now let's return our subtasks. I'll use that as the return value. You can see that payroll reconciliation has 2 items. They are the 2 actions. If we change our checkbox, we now have review accounts receivable, and that has 4 items. However, what we really want is to align our list of actions with the item which has been selected. Therefore, we need to create some padding at the top of our rows. We're going to edit our formula, and let's create another new line. We're going to call this padding. To create our padding, we're going to use the expand function. We're going to start with an empty text string, and the number of rows that we want to pad is based on our position. We want to return a single column, and then we want to pad each of those values with an empty text string. I'll close that bracket at the end. Let's create a new step called result, and this is going to stack our padding and our tasks together. We will use vstack, and we want to vstack the padding and the subtasks. Then let's return the result value. As you can see, we now have the padding cells and also our subtasks. Now, this isn't quite how we want it, so let's edit our formula. Within the vstack, we are going to add a title above our list of subtasks. That title is tasks. We also saw a few moments ago that our formula was offset by 1 row. Let's use the drop function, and we want to drop our result by 1 row. I'll close that bracket, and now let's calculate the result. Whichever item we check, we now get our task in the correct location. You will have noticed that when we had nothing selected, it returned an error. Let's handle that error. We're going to add if error in our formula, and if it is an error, we want to return an empty text string. And now when we calculate, if we select a task, it displays that value, but if we don't select a task, it doesn't display an error. Before we add some conditional formatting to this, let's add a small arrow to indicate that the tasks relate to the checkbox. I'll go to Insert, and then Symbol. In here we have a list of symbols for our font. I'm going to select my recently used, which is an arrow. Well, that's also available within my list of characters. I'll select the arrow and then click Insert, and then Close. We now have an arrow in that cell. Let's copy that down into the other rows. We don't want this arrow to display at all times. Let's change the font to white. we're now ready to apply our custom formatting. I'll select the columns which contain the checkbox, the arrow, and the list of tasks. I can then go to conditional formatting and new rule. We want this based on a formula. We want to check where, type equals. We're going to select cell D9 and I'll press F4 until we lock in the column but not the row. I'll select format. We want our font to be bold and we want to force our color to be black. I'll click OK, OK again. As you can see, we now have the breakdown for our tasks. Whichever item we select, it now displays our task value. And that is how we can create a simple drill down functionality. However, there is an issue. Somebody could select multiple tasks at the same time. And if they do, the formatting doesn't work correctly. So let's go and look to see how we can enforce a single checkbox selection. The issue we have is that if somebody checks multiple items, the formatting is applied based on the checkboxes, but we only have a single list of tasks. Let's apply data validation to ensure that we only allow a single box to be checked. We're going to select all of the cells, then go to data and data validation. In here, we're going to use custom, and we're going to use the formula that we saw to count the number of checked items, equals the sum, open bracket, of minus minus. We're going to select the range of cells, and we're going to press F4 to lock in those cell references. And I'll close the bracket at the end. If this formula evaluates to true, it allows somebody to change the cell. Therefore, we want to check where our sum is less than or equal to 1. I'll then click OK. Now, if we select an item, it displays the tasks. If we try to select another item, it doesn't allow us to make that change. The data validation doesn't allow it. Instead, we have to uncheck the first task and then select the second task. Therefore, the maximum number of items we can select is 1. If we want to allow 2, 3, or 4 items, we simply change the value inside our data validation. And now we can use our progress tracker. As we select each task, our progress increases. And we can also see the drill down for the details of each of those tasks. I hope this has inspired you to think about new ways of working with checkboxes. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and get notifications so you don't miss any of our future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.